Hello, everyone. We're getting started, so if you would come and join us in the sanctuary and take a seat up front. So we have a more intimate gathering. Welcome. Welcome to our monthly evening forum. It's wonderful to see you all tonight. I'm really glad you're here on a cold November night, and I know there are some accidents or something going on the Beltway that's also causing some delays, so I really appreciate your taking time to join us here tonight. We will get started and welcome others as they arrive. My name is Abhi Janamanchi. I'm one of the ministers who serves Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist.Church. We are a community where love works. And our mission is to explore the eternal, nurture community, and build a more just world. And tonight we gather for our first of this year's evening forums and focusing on a topic that is near and dear to our hearts, on immigration. And we will, of course, be hearing more from our speaker this evening, who I will introduce in a moment. But before that, I get to subject you to me, since I have the pulpit. Our congregation has been deeply involved and committed to immigrant justice and immigrant rights issues for many years. And it comes out of our commitment as a faith tradition. And it comes out of our being a part of this nation that we like to call a nation of immigrants. And comes out of our commitment to practicing radical hospitality. Now, our nation's ideal regarding hospitality to the stranger is evidenced, of course, in that immortal poem by Emma Lazarus that's inscribed underneath the Statue of Liberty. Here at our sea-washed sunset gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor, the twin cities aflame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, she cries with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Now, as a country founded by immigrants coming to a land inhabited by native people who suffered the brunt of our ancestors' selfishness and disrespect, we have a rather checkered history when it comes to immigration. As a nation, I believe we need to do a whole lot better dealing with this issue than we have been. We desperately need a broad commitment of all of our human resources, and right now we see little evidence of that commitment. Now, as a faith, Unitarian Universalism calls people to recognize that no one is a stranger, and to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and to promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Radical hospitality is a core value for us. Ours is a faith that upholds and promotes the freedom and dignity of all human beings. Now, this call to welcome the stranger, the alien, the immigrant, the refugee is an ancient precept in many world religions. Yet it is desperately needed in today's world, which is so infected by xenophobic fears, not just here, but around the world. Our world needs to hear words of welcome spoken across dividing lines. It needs to see more examples of strangers being welcomed as guests. It needs religious communities such as ours responding to the call to practice radical hospitality. And this is what we call hospitality of the heart and hand, and it begins here with us when we accept that we are all wanderers in exile, sojourners. And this hospitality of the heart and hand emboldens us to cross all boundaries and borders that separate us one from another. And this hospitality of the heart calls us to be a sanctuary, a spiritual and a physical sanctuary, to our immigrants and our refugee neighbors, our migrant and undocumented siblings. So, my friends, it is in that spirit that we gather tonight, not only to move on that commitment, but to also gain a deeper understanding that in turn will guide our commitment. So I'd like to introduce and welcome George Escobar, who serves as Casa's Senior Director of Human Services. Casa is the Mid-Atlantic region's largest immigrant serving and advocacy organization with over 900,000 members in 3 states. George Escobar oversees the majority of Casa's social service programming, which includes legal assistance, naturalization support, financial literacy, case management, health navigation, and health education initiatives. Programs within George's portfolio are charged with providing services that address disparities and place community members in a stable situation, setting them up for success, and introducing to Casa's power building and leadership development opportunities so that Casa members can participate in collective actions meant to create positive social change and address the root causes impacting the circumstances in which they find themselves. George has over 15 years of experience working for both the public and nonprofit sectors, designing and leading a variety of programs in economic development, health, and employment assistance targeting the Latino and immigrant community. So it is a real pleasure and honor to welcome George Escobar as our community forum speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. Abhi wants me to try this thing on, so forgive my pop star look with this little microphone, just to give me a little bit of liberty to kind of walk around a little bit. Thank you to Abhi. Thank you to everybody at Cedar Lane for inviting me today. It's really an honor to speak to you about this. I know many of you are very much involved in these issues, and see it as something that really is at the core of your values. So very honored to be here standing now with you to talk about this a little bit. But I think when I'd spoken to Abhi, we talked a little bit about talking about immigration overall and putting the situation we're faced with right now in the Trump administration into context, and really talking a little bit about how it is we came to this point and what really can you do to make a real difference in the lives of these people that are being unjustly persecuted by this administration. So I kind of wanted to give you a little bit, so again, I know many of you have been involved in this struggle for a very long time and probably definitely know some of these topics even better than I do, but if you'll allow me, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about immigration in general. Again, how we got here, the historical context. And when I think about immigration in general, one of the ways that helps me to really kind of focus and tell the story is through the eyes of my father. I recently lost my father this past year, and not that long ago, I was just rummaging through all the documents and all paperwork that that somebody does when you lose a loved one, right? You're always finding tax returns, and you're finding passports and different identity documents. And I stumbled onto this. Actually, I didn't stumble. This is exactly what I was looking for. Just this treasure trove of documents when he first immigrated to this country. My father was, when he first came to this country, he was a participant in what we know of now as the Bracero program. Anybody in here are familiar with the Bracero program? Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, I told you guys were experts. I knew it. So if you all remember, and the reason I bring this up is because that program really set the migration patterns that we see today, and really founded the types of diverse communities that we see today all across the United States, right? My father is from a small village in central Mexico, in the state of Mexico, and he participated in this program in the 50s and 60s. So as you probably remember, the Bracero program was around basically from post-World War II, but I think it started about 42, 43, and ran up until the early 60s. Nearly 5 million people about 3.5 million people participated in this program. About 6 million contracts were signed through this program. What was this program? This program was a way in which basically these large agricultural estates in California, primarily in California, could get cheap labor from Mexico. Apparently nobody wanted to do farm work. Whoa, that's a surprise, right? That's still the case today. Nobody likes the cheap wages that they pay. Well, but since Mexico was going through a deep-rooted agricultural and economic crisis, really going through a period of instability that was, kind of rooted in the false promises of the Mexican Revolution and corruption of the government that didn't realize all those commitments they made after the revolution in 1910 to 1920, we had a lot of landless peasants like my father, with land but not arable, unable to really do anything with the land itself. And so they were primed for participating in this program. And this program, what they did is they picked them up in Mexico, brought them across the border, made them, put them in company housing in these agricultural lands, and gave them a contract for a period of time during the growing season. Could be in California, it's a lot longer of a growing season, right? So sometimes it spanned up to a year. And then they would be shipped back to Mexico. But their wage was below minimum wage. Their wage kind of ranged around 85 cents to $1 per hour to be doing this backbreaking work, right? The minimum was set at 30 cents per hour. But the average wound up around 50, 60, 70 cents, right? So these Mexicans were brought in to cultivate these fields. It was a great program for the economy. It was a great program for the economy of California. California became the breadbasket that we know of today. Very successful for them, very successful for the Mexican government as well, because 10% of their wages were kept by the Mexican government. So each contract that was signed, they would keep 10%. It was supposedly deposited into a savings fund that they never collected. Why am I talking about this, you might ask? But I think because what it shows is that in this country, there is a period in which this country exploits workers, brings immigrants to the country to try to maximize its or benefit its economy in some sort of way. And then when circumstances change, programs end, or in the situation with the Bracero program, people were starting to figure out around the 60s, if you remember, that the housing was horrible. The housing in which many of the Braceros were housed were basically dilapidated buildings with no running water, basically outhouses with no heating and no way to cool them in the summer. Inspections just brought up horrendous conditions, and these folks were always paid less than than their contracts were made for, guaranteed. And enforcement was crappy. Neither Department of Labor or Department of Agriculture could really get a handle on being able to enforce minimum standards for living, for wages, etc. When these stories started to come up, well, now the program faced a backlash because it was exploiting workers, and it essentially ended, right? But what happened to these Mexicans? Many of them crossed the border many times illegally because now they're actually knowledgeable about different opportunities that exist beyond what was guaranteed them in the Bracero program, and they're human beings. They actually found opportunities that they were looking for when they first came here. Maybe not necessarily the opportunity that they were provided or that they were guaranteed through their contract, but they were provided access through their travels to other opportunities that gave them what they needed, and that was a lifeline for them and for their families. And that in and of itself kind of reveals what the story of immigration is. It's decisions and it's humanity. It's ultimately a result of individual decisions for people trying to make a better life for themselves. It's not, while economic reasons may have a pulling effect, you cannot create immigration programs and base their success or build a foundation upon pure economic means. It has never worked, right? Because what did we see as a result of that? And I say that now because even today, when we're talking about comprehensive immigration reform, even progressives sometimes get into a debate over how to regulate migration patterns and how to base the number of people that are coming with how much the economy can actually absorb, et cetera, et cetera. As controlled as you want to have some of those programs, again, it's important to realize that human beings follow opportunity, right? Human beings go try to make better lives for themselves. Human beings will always want to find a place in which they can find security, safety, and opportunity. Sometimes those opportunities cannot necessarily be predicted by mathematical models. At the close of the Bracero program, what we had now is, again, as the program was now being canceled, as it started to get a very bad reputation, both in the United States and in Mexico, as people were starting to realize that the Mexican government were cheating these workers, and the United States could not fulfill their commitments to minimum decent housing and other types of minimum standards. The program ends, and what happens? In the 60s and in the 70s, huge waves of massive immigration enforcement come upon cities in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Houston, and all over Texas, and millions of people get deported. If you all remember, they had a nice, cute little name for that operation back in the day. It was called Operation Wetback, if you all remember. This is when basically immigration enforcement, what we know of how we see immigration enforcement today has its roots in house by house, pulling immigrants out in the middle of the night, separating them from their families, and tossing them back to the countries they thought they were from. Interesting, because many people caught in Operation Wetback, many cases were actually American citizens, and people that were actually natives to Texas and California, but they had brown skin, and so they were assumed to be Mexican and brought back. Right? So we saw that. So we saw, on the one instance, post-World War II economy growing, needing more workers, huge fields in California new land being irrigated, a need for workers. So what happens? Bring the immigrants, and you exploit the heck out of them. And when things go wrong, you cancel the program, and you start deporting these same workers and send them back to where you think they are. Same kind of wave, you can argue, happened around the 1980s, 1990s. Why? A new type of need for immigrant labor came about. It was basically interesting enough, right? Because we kind of sit in these, we're speaking from, these areas right now. It was basically the suburbanization of population settlements, right? Like we started to see larger suburbs being developed right outside of heavily populated cities. People now wanted to live a little bit further away than the cities, and you started to see some of these suburban areas starting to develop. New opportunities existed for both employment, but also commerce and the services industry. A new kind of demand happened. This one, there wasn't a Bracero program for this one, but we did see another large wave of immigration coming, spiking around that time. And again, there were opportunities. There were jobs in the service industry, in restaurants, hotels. It basically, again, laid the foundation for the community that we know actually locally here, right? A lot of the spikes we see in the Washington, D.C. suburbs basically came about during that era, the 1970s, 80s, 90s. We saw that kind of increase, right? Not agricultural work, more based in the services industry, construction, development, hotel industries, restaurant workers. And again, now we have, again, another administration that comes in who now, again, tries to scapegoat the immigrant community. We see the Trump administration and let's be honest, they have a huge following, right? It's not just one individual. It's not just this guy who won the election because of Russian interference. It's not just his cadres. There is a large segment of the population that is uncomfortable with the demographics that we see today and are scapegoating our immigrant community just like they did back in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s, right? And again, now we see them react predictably in the same way we saw them back then. Let's put a deportation infrastructure into place, and let's start deporting people, because that's going to be the solution to all the problems we have. This is a total oversimplification of everything that's going on, but I think you can see what I'd like you to see is how these kind of fluctuations between attracting immigrant workers and deportation kind of have a cyclical nature to them, right? It's difficult right now, especially for the immigrant community that we have now, to say, you know what, this is natural. It happens every so often, right? No, it is unjust, and we should make sure that we should reverse it in every way possible. But the reality is that this is how this country reacts to these type of situations, right? There is almost a sense of normalcy when you see these things happen. And there is a sense sometimes even of many people in our citizenry of complacency. Oh, it happens. It's natural. No, these immigrants aren't really like us. They're different. They don't have, they may not overtly say it, but even sometimes in our own immigrants' rights movement, we see this divisiveness, this compartmentalization of our immigrant community, seeing them as other, right? Seeing their major benefit to our society as being just the fruit of the labor that they produce, right? And then placing them in defining them in a very economic undertone, right? That's not what our society should be built on, right? We're a human society that thrives on connections with each other. Immigrants as well want, as we talked before, they want to come to they have reasons for making the decisions that they made, right? They're looking for secure, safe environments where they can develop their family, where they can have a safe and peaceful existence. This administration has been very, I would say, effective in, again, compartmentalizing this community and almost subhumanizing them in such a way, and looking purely in economic terms about what types of benefits immigrants can bring to the United States. Now we see this undercurrent, right, in this entire administration, how they're trying to even, I'm sure you've heard recently, how they want to redefine what immigration means, right? They want to purely bring in and completely modify the existing immigration system to benefit only worthy people coming to this country, right? Only people that can prove that they have some sort of technical expertise or some sort of that can bring some sort of specific economic benefit to our society, right? They want to get rid of family-based immigration, where they want to, as you probably are aware, right now, if you're a citizen of this country, you can petition an immediate relative, your husband, your wife, your partner, your child, to this country if they're not with you, to be a legal permanent resident and join you in this country, right? It's the foundation of our immigration system. The Trump administration wants to get rid of all of that, right? They don't believe, and they have this real, again, economic term that they like to attach to it, right? Chain immigration, where you have a chain of family members that are coming to accompany their family in this country. Well, that's how we all got here, right? Well, certainly, I'm Mexican. I got here because my dad was finally got his papers through some of this exploitative work that he did. But many of us came to this country through a relative, right? And no matter how far you trace your ancestry to this country or to another, there is some point in your family history where you had an ancestor in another country that came to join a family member in this country, right? The Trump administration says no. They want to end this, right? They want to end, and this, when we're talking about legal immigration, of course, all of those folks that have the unfortunate situation right now being undocumented are all eligible for deportation under this administration, right? Every single one of them. Speaking of the last 10 years, we had, we had a situation where, and it's really funny, right? Because not funny, it's very sad. But I mean, in our movement, in the immigrant rights movement, we saw a pattern over the last 10 years where we saw progress in terms of how this country was viewing immigration. We saw. There's no question the Obama administration did not fulfill its promises to the Latino voter and to the immigrant voter. He ran on a platform of immigration reform. Unfortunately, then you all know the story, right? He had 2 years in Congress to really do anything significant, and he expended that political capital on the Affordable Care Act. And we were left by the wayside, and before you know it, we lost control of Congress, and there was nothing much. There was no path to any comprehensive reform. But there was, thanks to a lot of advocacy from a lot of you and a lot of us, there was a cognizant effort on the part of the Obama administration to view immigration differently, to value those folks that were here and working and providing a contribution to their communities. We saw the DACA program, right, in 2012, after years of failed work in Congress to bring about a DREAM Act. The Obama administration, again, as a result, he was a great guy, but this wasn't, he wouldn't have moved on this had it not been for all the advocacy that we all did collectively, right? But in 2012, he was able to create the DACA program by executive action, right? And in 2014, he actually even proposed the DAPA program, which is the Deferred Action for Parents of Americans program. If you all remember, this was going to be truly revolutionary. It was going to expand the number of people that would be eligible for work authorization, and was going to provide it to people that could prove that they had a U.S. citizen child. So out of those 11 million people right now that we know of, and that's just an estimate, right? It could be a lot higher, but that we know are undocumented, more than half, you would say, actually, have a U.S. citizen child in this country, right? Because many people have been living in this country without status for decades, so long enough to have kids, right? And again, these are people living in this country. Yes, they're working, and yes, they're contributing economically to our society. And we use those bullet points all the time, right? We talk about the taxes they pay. We talk about everything, all the economic benefit. But again, we're talking about human beings that have roots in our local communities, right? And these are folks. The DAPA program would have provided these parents of U.S. citizens, right? You're born here. If you're born here, you're a U.S. citizen. About 5 to 6 million of them had that kind of situation. That program would have allowed these folks, remember, not a pathway to legal residence, not a pathway to citizenship, but again, would allow them to legally work in this country and protect them from deportation. And the Republican Party said no, right? And ultimately sued the President Obama, to keep this program from happening. Why did they do that? Why did they sue? Again, this was, to be honest, the DACA program for the kids. You all familiar with the DACA program? The DAPA program for the parents? These are compromises for us, right? I remember, even at Casa having a long discussion about DACA and still being pissed off, frankly, that, oh my God, all this is going to be a permit for them to work. How is this different than the Bracero program? I thought to myself back then, right? Now I'm just like super, do anything to keep the DACA program around. But even back then, I was like, this is crap. We want something real, right? We don't just want work permits. This is the modern version of the Bracero program. But even that was killed by the Republican Party. And I say the Republican Party because I don't want there to be confusions about that, right? It was the Republican Party, and it was attorney generals from eventually wound up being 11 states, all Republicans, that put this lawsuit together and killed the DAPA program, right? That was it. That was the end. We didn't have DAPA. The Obama administration ended. We had the DACA program. And, yes, we had these soft commitments from the Clinton campaign about what she would do. But we were damn sure what was going to happen with the Trump administration, right? And lo and behold, this is how he wants to spend his political capital. You all know that he has rescinded the DACA program, right? Arbitrarily. Again, he says, because, if you get into the weeds, you find out that the reason that he's trying to, what his talking points are is that he has no choice because that lawsuit against DAPA was going to be extended into DACA, right? And he had no choice because of these powerful state attorney generals were going to sue him. Last time I checked, he had about 100 lawsuits pending right now, right? But okay, he's scared of this lawsuit. He kills DAPA. He kills DACA, and he killed the CAM program. Do you all remember the CAM program? A CAM program was another type of effort on the part of the Obama administration to try to help help those, it was a response to the unaccompanied minor crisis. You all remember the unaccompanied minor crisis, right? We're especially affected here because we have such a large Central American community, right? This program, the idea of this program was basically a refugee-based program. It was basically a way in which to help provide kids documentation, again, another work permit, and possible, depending if they qualified for refugee status, they could actually become a legal permanent resident. But more often than not, 90% of those kids that qualified for this program, all they were going to get was a work authorization. And these are kids that have parents with documentation living in this country, right? They could have TPS, they could have DACA, they could be legal permanent residents, but these are kids that had to prove, these are kids that were still in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. They had to prove to a State Department interviewer that that their life was at risk, and they were in imminent harm and were about to take the trip to the north and come join their parents up here, right? This was a refugee-based program, right? The program was really inefficiently run, and not a lot of folks actually benefited from it. But still, it was a minor attempt to try to help these kids, to try to save these kids. And as soon as the Trump administration came into power, by February, he killed it. Again, why? Really, what is the end game other than to scapegoat the immigrant community, right? Now, we're in this situation that the next real program that's up for elimination, and you all are probably familiar with it, is the Temporary Protected Status Program, the TPS program. If you all remember, the TPS program, again, is another basically refugee kind of light program, right? TPS provided work authorization, again, not a path to citizenship, to individuals that can prove they migrated to this country as a result of a natural disaster, right? And there's about 7-8 different countries that have these designations. There's more than 300,000 people nationwide that have benefited from this program, 200,000 of which are from El Salvador. And here in Maryland itself, we have over 30,000 people with TPS. The number of people with TPS is more than twice the number of people we have with DACA in this state. We got about 9,000 kids with DACA. We got about 23,000 people with TPS. This program has already been rescinded for a few countries. Haiti, remember that Haitian earthquake? Apparently things are great in Haiti. You can return to Haiti anytime. So that program is gone. The Nicaraguan program has been eliminated. The Honduran program from Honduras, you guys are probably familiar. Honduras is one of the most dangerous countries in the world. Had got a little bit of a 6-month reprieve. They're going to analyze things, but I'm sure they're going to eliminate that program. And El Salvador is up for debate and up for they have to make a decision on El Salvador by basically January. Those 200,000 people I described have until March, have right now work authorization and protection from deportation until March. The government must decide what they're going to do with that program by January. And things, as you can see, do not look good. All right? So here we go. CAM, DACA, TPS, DAPA. Again, we have 11 million people that are undocumented in this country, right? And these are folks, again, that have been here for decades and are many of whom, probably 60, 70% actually of whom, actually have parents, actually have U.S. citizen children. But the Trump administration has decided, you know what, that doesn't matter. We'll separate those families, those kids mean nothing to me. And here's the funny part, right? You all remember, I grew up in California. I remember when California was about as conservative as you can get, right? As a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s there, you know, I saw a white person, I was afraid of them because there were a lot of racist things happening in California. You all remember in the 90s, there was actually a proposition that was passed by referendum. About 60-70% of the population actually voted to restrict all types of benefits to undocumented immigrants, including emergency room assistance. So basically, an undocumented immigrant could not go to an emergency room and would be deported if they show up. And people taking those people associated or harboring undocumented immigrants were also subject to severe penalties, including time in jail. And this was a proposition that was won by referendum, right? Eventually, the Supreme Court said that was all illegal, which, thank God, we have a Supreme Court for that, right? And many of those issues were reversed. That was California as soon as, what was that, 94, I think. What do people think of California today? They're just like the progressive headquarters, right? That's where a bunch of good policies that are exported from. Sometimes even thought overly crunchy and strange, some of these proposals that are coming from California, right? That's thanks to who? Thanks to actually my generation. Kids of immigrants that actually grew up, remembered being persecuted and their parents being persecuted as kids, and grew up and actually did something about it and voted all those idiots out, right? That is what the Republican Party is seeing. Remember those 5 million kids? What do you think those kids are going to, who do you think those kids are going to vote for? You think they're going to run to the Republican Party? Trump is killing his party, but he doesn't care, right? I think the entire Republican Party is really killing themselves. They don't understand that there is a huge demographic tidal wave that's going to hit them in about 20 years. But right now, we're in the situation we're at. And we still can't be complacent, right? We can't allow what happened in 2016 to happen to us again, right? And there's still so many people in these, God, I hope it's only 4 years, right? In these next 3 years, there's so many people that are going to be hurt, probably potentially lose their lives as a result of these stupid policies that this administration is just hanging on to with a death grip. And literally, it's a death grip, right? Because they are killing themselves eventually, electorally. But right now, we have to find a way to resist. We have to find a way to outsmart these people. And the good thing is, the major advantage is, the good news is we are having success, right? All we got to look at is the election in Virginia. Again, let me, we have our own concerns about how truly progressive, Ralph Northam is and his agenda is, and you all remember how he waded into immigration issues and was very careful. But we have a partner there, right? And look at what happened in the House of Delegates. Oh my God! In Virginia itself, the state of Virginia now has a transgender member in their allowed to vote within their delegation, right? The first 2 Latinas were elected in Prince William County and now in the House of Delegates. Again, this is Virginia, right? We just saw a bunch of Nazis march in Charlottesville not that long ago. But things can change quickly, right? But we need to figure out a way. We need to act. So, in terms of what you all can do, and I think it's really important. Number one is to really understand understand what you're getting into, right? I would always advise you as much as possible to study and to learn more about immigration and look at the facts and always defend yourself with the facts, right? Real quickly, we're talking about immigration patterns. I talked about Mexicans, right? Mexicans are not coming to this country anymore. That's again an oversimplification, but if you look at migration patterns, Mexicans are not coming here to this country in the numbers they used to. There's basically, and not only Mexicans, but immigrants in general, there's generally as many people coming into the country that are leaving. So immigration right now is at a net neutral, almost even a net negative, right? What is the crisis that Trump is responding to? God knows. But it's working with his racist base, right? But the facts, and again, this is you can find this anywhere in any study you'll find. Over the past 20 years, immigration to this country is basically neutral. As many people coming in as coming out. What is different about immigration patterns you'll find now is they're not, you can say, economic refugees like my dad was, right? These are not people in a large majority of people coming to this country are no longer folks looking exclusively for economic, are coming for economic reasons. They're coming for reasons that are much more severe, right? The largest number of immigrants that are coming into this country now are mostly Central Americans, which is interesting because this is exactly what we're facing here, because we have a large Central American population, right? Why are they coming here? Completely different reasons, right? They're fleeing an unstable government. They're fleeing violence and death from their country. Would they be from any other country in the world that wasn't a Latin American country? They would probably qualify for refugee status. But because they're not being persecuted because of their ethnicity, right? They're not being persecuted because of their religion. They don't qualify in this country for refugee status, right? So they're not able to access those benefits. Therein kind of lies the problem that we're facing, right? The immigration system that has not been updated, basically, right? We're living in the same kind of we're living under the same type of rules and the same type of system that governed my father when he first came to this country, right? The system does not reflect the reality and doesn't allow people like this wave of Central Americans that are coming, fleeing violence to qualify for any type of benefit, right? And so we need to figure out what to do, and we need to figure out how to stop this, right? And how to allow and provide an opportunity for these people to seek justice, right? And there's no question that elections are one of the key pieces of trying to make steady ground in that direction, right? And I think, a lot of us here in Maryland, we talk about our elected officials. They're great. They're great. They're blue. They have after their name, there's always a D in parentheses next to their name, and that's great, but that's just because they identify with the Democratic Party is not enough, right? What we need, especially right now, is we need champions. In your engagement with your congressman, whether it's Congressman Raskin, whether it's Senator Van Hollen, whether it's Senator Cardin, we need to be forceful with them, right? We've always had these conversations. We've always had this experience with many of them saying that, look, I got you. I love the immigrant community. I'm with you. It's like, that's great. That's great. Be with us. But you know what? Right now, we need leadership. We need a champion. We need to start thinking outside the box, right? We need to hear your plan on how you're gonna preserve TPS and how you're gonna preserve DACA. We need to understand what your conversations are with the other side in terms of trying to pass a DREAM Act. We need to ask, and we need to make sure that we ask for a clean DREAM Act, right? Because again, remember, those of you, I'm sure you know what I mean when I say DREAM Act, right? This is trying to help those kids, especially those that have DACA, remain in the country now that the program has been eliminated, right? But what is the cost to that program? Are we going to allow a wall to be built? Are we going to allow 20,000 more troops, paramilitary troops, coming into our community to search out the undocumented population that did not qualify for DACA? Remember, DACA was a compromise, right? DACA isn't the end-all, be-all, and neither is the DREAM Act. There's 11 million people we have to look out for and we have to protect, right? So let's not compromise in such a way that leads to actually a worsening situation. I mean, I'll be honest, when we talk about DACA, these kids, many of them will actually, some of their, I would say like half of the people with DACA right now will probably have their work authorizations expire in 2009. I'm sorry, what am I thinking? In 2019, right? What do we have in 2020? That might change the calculus here. What do we have in 2018 that might change the calculus, right? And this that I'm sharing with you is how we see it in the immigrant rights movement, and how our kids see it, how the DACA youth see it, right? They don't want to sacrifice their parents just for another 6 months of eligibility for work authorization, right? As strange as it sounds, especially in the moment we are, everybody wants comprehensive reform, and it's not to say that we'll not espouse a policy that protects DACA youth and protects our TPS population, that allows for some riders from the other side that they feel is important to add to those bills, but ultimately we have to look at the fine print and make sure that we're not compromising our entire community, right? And we need leadership from our Democratic representatives in Congress to make sure that doesn't happen, right? Not that long ago, I think it was last week, Senator Van Hollen gave a very wonderful floor speech on TPS. And we're starting to see our elected representatives start to get the message, because they understand, for example, that there's more than twice as many people with TPS and with DACA. So they're taking stands on the floor, and they're educating their colleagues about this program, because many people across the country don't know TPS, right? But we need to demand that from our elected officials, right? Other steps, I mean, of course, I'm going to ask you to support us, right? Casa is a membership-based organization. We don't have 900,000 members. We have 90,000 members, although I wish it was 900. It will soon be 900,000, I'm sure. Gustavo Torres, I'm sure that it's going to be his annual plan for next year. But right now we have 90,000 members, and these are active individuals that participate. They're not only receiving services, right? These are people that have leadership roles within our organization and set our agenda, right? That is what we're about as an organization. Organizations like us that put our community in the front and lead from behind necessitate that type of support, right? Because what we're looking for and what we strive for is collective action. And leadership development of our members, right? So we also have to be careful as advocates, and you all are advocates in this community, that we don't speak for our community, right? We help our community and train them to speak for themselves. They are the ones and their stories that are going to ultimately lead us to victory, right? It's not through our, as much as we want to help, and as much as we're frustrated by what's happening in the world today, it's important for us to always look to our community first, right? And have them lead, and listen to them, and listen to their stories, and listen to their ideas, and listen to the direction that they want us headed towards. There's a long history of patronizing policies that try to, again, see immigrants just as an economic digit, right? And not as true human beings, and don't speak to their ultimate goals as human beings, right? We need to learn to ultimately step aside and allow them the opportunity to speak, and allow them the opportunity to lead. That is the best way that we can be supportive, right? And organizations like us do that. We do that through our organizing. We do that through our advocacy. We'd love to have you contribute. We have both what we call our C3 fundraising arm and our C4 fundraising arm. Our C4 is the one that's a little bit more political and actually, supports certain candidates, and our C3 is purely on the advocacy and on the services side. We appreciate your support. I actually have my colleague Jenny Friedman, who's Jenny over there, who's the expert at developing really creative ways at engaging supporters of ours in really becoming active with our organization, right? Not only through contributing monetarily, but also indirectly sometimes. She actually spent the whole day today going from house party to house party with great folks that decide to throw a house party among a dozen of their friends and a dozen of their neighbors to talk about immigration, just like we're talking about today, right? And also, an opportunity for people to contribute. We have multiple services that we provide. We do legal clinics, we do citizenship clinics, and we rely heavily on volunteer support. We rely heavily on folks that want to get engaged and have a few hours on a Saturday afternoon to fill out paperwork or do interpretation or even doing copies, doing whatever they can to help. And we have multiple ways that you can help in that direction. And overall, it's being interested in this and being motivated to make a difference is what we really appreciate from you all, and what we really hope that you can engage with us on. I know a lot of folks are very both motivated, discouraged, a mix of emotions, angered, and just can't find what to do with themselves at this particular time. But what I encourage you to do is remember what happened in 2016, right? In many cases, it was that complacency, that lack of, that belief that this crazy guy wasn't going to win, right? A belief that, of course, Hillary Clinton's gonna make her way through. And that lack of real motivation to get engaged that actually resulted in the situation we're in now. So I hope that you act on your motivations today or now or in the short term, but that also you make plans to continue to be engaged over the long term, right? And when you speak to your congressional representatives, you're asking for them to be champions, and you're asking them on how you can be more closely engaged with them. And over the long term, you find your way to support organizations such as ourselves in any way that you can. I think I've talked long enough. I actually didn't think I was going to talk that long, and I apologize. But I was wondering, and I think this is the fun part, is trying to answer some of your questions.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, George.
Sure.
You covered a lot of ground in the time that you had, and especially the way in which you connected what's going on now to what used to happen, especially in relation to the Bracero program, was particularly important for us to be able to hear. Because it's easy to somehow think that things were going hunky-dory before, and all of a sudden now everything's going haywire. No, this is a pattern that we see that's been ongoing in the context of how this nation was founded, how it has functioned, and now how it is continuing to perpetuate that. So we have a few questions that people have handed, so I'm just going to ask, and of course you're also welcome to come up and ask a question. Maybe we'll do this, we'll alternate between people asking questions and also my reading from some of these questions. So one of the first question is Casa participating with Sanctuary DMV in a rapid response network? And do you feel that this is important given TPS and DACA situation?
Sure. Yeah. No, we have a great relationship with Sanctuary DMV, and I know that means different things to different people, and how Sanctuary works. But we've had an evolving relationship where one of the primary projects that we kind of worked on was an accompaniment for folks that were given appointments at immigration headquarters in Baltimore and in Virginia. Towards this, at the start of the administration, we had no idea really what was really going to happen, and how people were going to treat folks that go to their appointments at immigration. As you probably know by now, there's nearly 1 million people, something around 800,000 people across the country that one way or another in the past had been provided discretion by ICE weren't eligible for any type of immigration benefit, but were allowed an opportunity to remain in the country so long as they checked in on a regular basis. So these check-in appointments sometimes are every 6 months, every year. At the beginning of the year, we partnered with Sanctuary DMV to do these accompaniments at those check-ins, and so we would have wonderful rallies with multi-faith representatives that were there just to support that particular individual that had their appointment. We had mixed results coming out of that, and I think some of you might have participated in some of those activities. We had some days we were successful, some days actually we had people deported during those check-ins, and I'll be honest, very traumatic experience for everybody that was there for some of those. One particular individual, Liliana Cruz Mendez, that you might remember, we did have a Sanctuary DMV congregation there, and she was unfortunately deported during that check-in. So very challenging times. But yeah, as I understand it, Sanctuary DMV we have our own kind of rapid response system already, and we're learning how best to kind of combine it with what's going to come out through Sanctuary DMV. So great partners of ours.
Thank you. Would you introduce yourself?
Probably. Do you want the headphones?
Would you?
The red light is on. Does that mean it's working? Okay.
It's on. Go ahead.
All right. I'm going to invite you to set aside for a moment the social justice lens that we all tend to look at these issues through. And I invite you to comment on the following proposition. At a time in our national history when we have been schooled to be concerned that baby boomers, like my generation, are going to be taxing various programs because there's not enough wage earners, taxpayers, and the generation behind us to support us in our longevity. That seems to be a premise that everybody agrees with. Under those conditions, it is fiscally irresponsible to export small business owners, wage-earning heads of family, kids in whom we've invested 12 years of public funds and an education, and to export all these people and suffer the consequences of the ripple effects. Export a small business owner, the family may go on public funding and public support, as may some of the workers. Taking all those things into consideration, it is fiscally irresponsible to do the kinds of things this Republican administration is setting up to do, and merely passes a tax burden further down. You can get there without making the moral argument that this particular administration is completely immune to.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the points that we're trying to make with the TPS situation, right? Because it illustrates that point. TPS program, especially for the Salvadoran community, has been around for nearly 20 years. So these folks, unlike the DACA population, because the DACA has only been around for 5 years, the program, the TPS program has been around for 20 years, and that work authorization has actually allowed many folks to create their small businesses, get mortgages, apply for mortgages, buy a house. These are middle-class folks, no question about it. I'm sure many of you know TPS families yourselves. To take and deport those, first of all, to rescind their work authorization, which would begin to default their mortgages, which would take away their small businesses, and then further to deport them with, again, like you said, many of these folks actually, about 70-80% of them have U.S. citizen children, again, increases the burden on the state and is going to have a huge economic impact on local counties and municipalities where they live. There's no question. And it is irresponsible, and it is an advocacy tool to tell those stories, and that's been part of the strategy for a lot of the folks that are trying to push this. But it is, because it is a localized effect and a localized like economic issue, it is hard to make the argument on the national stage, on the national perspective. And I think those are some of the challenges that ourselves and other advocates are actually having with TPS. But there is no doubt there's a huge negative economic impact that we're going to see by the rescission of TPS. Forget about DACA, because DACA, similarly, right? Many of these youth have had impressive starts to their careers, but there's a lot less actually studied about the economic impact of those, of the rescission of DACA. There's a lot more data in terms of TPS, and it is really alarming how big of an impact it's going to create.
This is an interesting question. I think people would be very interested to get your response. What is your recommended elevator answer to the question, why do they deserve to stay if they came here illegally?
Oh, yeah, the age-old question. Again, I think it's very simple. These folks are, again, integral parts of our society. Not only have they provided an economic benefit to our communities, as in the example of TPS was just made, but the inroads and that they have made within our own society and the contributions both culturally, socially, and economically at every level, from municipal, state to national, is in of itself a reason why solutions need to be found. You can dig into each one of those a lot deeper and find much more reasons, but the mere fact that we have an undocumented population as large as we have in this country speaks volumes about the contributions that they have made, and the length of time that they have been in this country, an average of 12 to 15 years when you talk about the entire population as a whole. Of course, there's pockets of those folks that have been here a lot longer. You're talking about ingrained impacts weaving throughout all of our society and providing multiple contributions, both culturally, socially, and economically. So that in of itself, and I know that's longer than an elevator speech, but that in and of itself, given the large number, given the length of time that they have lived here, given the fact that many of them, and a large majority of them, actually have U.S.-born citizen children, is a reason to act in of itself.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Betsy Devlin Foltz, and I have a question about what role Governor Hogan plays in this, and also what we might ask of the Democratic candidates coming up for the 2018 elections.
Oh, I think that's a great question. So in terms of Hogan, I mean, huge challenge, right? Because the guy is actually has a reputation of just trying to survive under the radar, right? Neither embracing Trump wholeheartedly or rejecting his base. At the state level, I think one of the primary goals and one of the primary asks is what is their role in cooperation with ICE. One of the number one pipelines to deportation is our jails, basically. The easiest, the lowest hanging fruit that ICE has to deport folks is to simply go into jails and ask people questions, racially profile brown people, and ask them if they have papers or not, take their fingerprints and send them on their way and deport them. So, and these are folks that, you may say, oh, jail, you did something wrong. No. In many instances, people that are apprehended and being processed are being placed there temporarily before a magistrate decides to press charges. Before, in many cases, sometimes they may be there just waiting for their bail to be processed. So these are not folks that are hardened criminals. These are not folks that have extensive criminal backgrounds. But it's it's vital to have state governors and local municipal actors ensure that they're not giving ICE complete freedoms to troll around jails and courthouses, frankly, racially profiling brown people and looking to increase their deportation quota for the month. Because that is what's happening right now, especially in the Baltimore jail that is under the governor's jurisdiction. Previously, Walter O'Malley had declared openly that there is no engagement with ICE, that they do not have free access to the jails, only in instances where folks are apprehended with felonies or multiple or very complicated multiple charges. Will there be communication? But in the case of Hogan, he has basically ripped apart that policy and now provides ICE free and open access. So I think that's, and also we need more leadership from the governor to create secure locations within our communities. We're seeing ICE patrol churches. We're seeing them patrol outside of schools. They may be not on campus, and they may not be right outside of, like, for example, a nonprofit, but they are merely a block away in a very decent size radius. So we need leadership from the governor to ensure that people that go to school, kids that go to school, people that access hospitals and access vital services can do so freely without believing that they're at risk of deportation.
Thank you. Realistically, how temporary are the temporary bans?
Bans, is that the Muslim ban or what?
I guess it's a general question, I would suspect, around...
The temporary bans.
which I think is more around the Muslim ban.
Is that, again, I think it's less, and hopefully I'm answering this and going in the direction that you wanted me to answer this. But I think temporary, when we talk about temporary bans or the limits that have been placed on the bans, remember, we're not talking about the intent of the administration. This is actually the courts that have created limits to what is actually implementable, right? So any restrictions that were placed, let's face it, Trump, and he said it on his campaign trail, he said it on his first executive order, right? He wants brown people out, whether they be Muslim, whether they be Arab, whether they be Mexican, because he believes the world are just a bunch of Mexicans and Muslims. I think that's what he believes, right? So, so outside of the United States. So he wants all those people out, regardless, right? And his executive orders were basically codifying that out, right? Which were clearly illegal. But it's thanks to these lawsuits, and honestly, I can brag a little bit. For example, on DACA, we have a lawsuit, and we're suing the Trump administration to try to preserve DACA, again saying that he arbitrarily rescinded it. Similar to the Muslim ban, right? He just arbitrarily thought, I don't like these brown people, I'm going to make something up and try to keep them from coming to this country. So those temporary, those boundaries were set by the court, not by the administration. I think that's important to remember, right? That we're, as much as we have problems with the court and the Supreme Court in particular, we need to make sure we go through the judicial process to check these type of really racist policies, right?
Thank you.
I hope that's what you thought.
I'm Deborah Vollmer, and quite a few years ago, in the 70s and 80s, I worked for the United Farm Workers Union as an attorney.
That's great.
And I remember at that time there was some tension. The union, including Cesar Chavez, would sometimes want to call immigration because undocumented people were being used to break the strike, and of course they're very vulnerable. I'm wondering today how you feel about organized labor in general? Are they allies? Is there a mix, and maybe some unions not so supportive, but others supportive? What's your assessment of that?
Ooh, that's a great question. No, that's a great question. And I think overall, organized labor has been a tremendous advocate and a tremendous support. I think, it's interesting you bring on, those, the United Farm Workers and undocumented immigrants. I mean, I think that was also a result of the strategy that the UFW, was trying to put across. And, they needed to create, they needed to draw lines in the sand, right? And obviously it was always easy for these growers to just bring in more undocumented labor. But again, my dad had his own complicated relationship with the farm worker organizers, which was, I think, very kind of replicated itself throughout the country, right? I think there maybe, there was a lack of engagement in the UFW case, there was a lot of lack of engagement with undocumented workers, right? There wasn't, there was a sense of us and them back then that created a lot of that kind of friction, right? But I think today there's been a lot of lessons learned from that, and I wouldn't say that's a dynamic today. I would definitely say that if it wasn't for organized labor, we'd be in a lot worse situations, to be honest. They have obviously, they have pretty big coffers, right? And they've contributed dramatically to progressive campaigns and to progressive candidates that have really kind of stemmed the tide, you could say. I think still there's a lot more work to be done, but I actually think there has been a lot of lessons learned from those days, and I really consider, the SEIUs and the AFSCMEs and the UFCWs and all like true allies. Everybody has their end game, right? But I think they're important allies to the immigrant rights movement.
Thank you. What would proper comprehensive immigration reform look like? Likewise, a clean dream
question.
act. Yep. in a minute.
A Clean Dream Act, let's do the easy one first, right? The Clean Dream Act, I kind of talked about it. It's basically just what it is. Let's just allow people with DACA to continue and stay here, right? Let's figure out a way in which, kids can prove that if they're in the country for a certain amount of years, and have, zero criminal background or minimal criminal background, et cetera, can stay in the country, right? And that's it. No writer that says, in exchange for a wall, in exchange for 20,000, troops, because this is what's being discussed right now, right? Like what's being discussed is an additional 20,000 troops, and I call them troops, right? Because these are paramilitary troops. One thing that people don't realize is over $13 billion, this country spends over $13 billion with a B dollars a year in immigration enforcement. Over 40,000 troops are already between ICE and between the ICE enforcement folks and Border Patrol. 40,000 troops and $13 billion, right, already. And immigration is at net zero. What did I just say, right? Like, what is the crisis? Why spend more money? Why increase more troops? Like, no. So that's what a Clean Dream Act is, right? It's like no troops, no wall, nothing except what we're talking about. Just the Dream Act, right? Just the continuation, basically, of DACA. And that in itself, again, as I said, is a compromise. We're not talking about comprehensive reform. We're saying DACA. Let's keep DACA, basically, and call it a Dream Act. Boom, right? Like, I think that's already a dirty Dream Act, to be honest, because it's not, it's a very limited population. Comprehensive immigration reform, look, we had a bill in 2010 that passed the Senate. You guys may have remembered it. And what happened? We had the votes in the House, even though we didn't have control of the House. Republicans already had in the House. And what happened? Boehner never put it up to vote, right? And again, those obstructionists, now they're calling it Democrats obstructionists, but back then it was all obstructionist Republicans keeping even a vote from happening, right? Mm-hmm. So that was comprehensive immigration reform. One of the great things that it had is that it allowed TPS people with TPS, a pathway to citizenship, right? It basically said, look, these poor people have been around for 20 years, they have work authorization, they keep, every 18 months, they got to pay the government $500 just to keep their papers in order, their work authorization. Let's allow them to become residents and eventually citizens, right? Those were great. There were things that were not so great in there too, right? There were people that basically, had to wait 20 years basically to become legal permanent residents. And there were other kind of dicey things there too. But I think but overall, I think that can be used as a foundation. Overall, comprehensive immigration reform should codify TPS, should allow people with DACA an opportunity to have legal permanent residence. Again, should look at people, look at how long people have been living in this country. Of course, subject them to criminal background checks, whatever, that's fine, but allow them a process under which they could actually apply to stay in this country over the long term, right? Of course, there's going to be back and forth on how you measure, the migration patterns over the long term, and I think that's important too. But I think those are the fundamental asks that we would have and starting points for any kind of negotiation for comprehensive reform.
So climate change will hugely increase the flow of refugees to the U.S. and Montgomery County. How should white climate activists work with Casa to prepare for this crisis?
I think that's another great question, right? And I think the two are intertwined, right? The question is already there. The two are intertwined. Climate change is just going to be another reason for people to immigrate here. So I think the immigrant rights movement could benefit a lot from the thinking of the climate change movement in terms of understanding what those patterns could look like and we just talked about a comprehensive immigration reform, really. Like what can be incorporated into immigration reform policies that incorporate some of this inevitable migration patterns that we're going to see because of climate change, right? For example, right now, there's an immigration lottery system. Basically, there's few pathways into this country legally, right? You all probably are aware. This is why we talk about immigration reform, right? If you're, which by the way, the lottery system, again, you all probably remember this, right? Trump wants to get rid of that too, because apparently this guy who killed some people got his papers through a lottery, whatever. But to come to this country, there's very few pathways. Proving you're a refugee is very difficult. A climate refugee doesn't exist within immigration law, right? It's not codified anywhere. You have to, again, be persecuted by the state because of your religion or what you believe or who you are, who you identify as. Those are the only ways to prove refugee status, and with refugee status, you can come into the country, right? So I think one of the real kind of those on the policy side, I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen between both movements. I think that can benefit both. But ultimately, on the organizing side, it's also telling these stories to each other, right? Telling our community stories to folks that are most interested about climate change, and telling climate change stories to those to our leaders within the immigrant rights movement, and kind of fostering that kind of natural bottom up, like cross pollination. I think those are two ways I see that we can really work together over the long term.
I'm Betty Hoover. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the detention center situation. Some of us are visiting the detention centers. There's in Maryland, there's one in Howard County. Yeah. In Stowe Hill, the children are being kept in Bowie, and the stories we get are pretty abysmal. And I understand the private prison corporations is going to be creating more beds to house more people. What can we do? What's Casa's position? And thank you for the amazing work that you're doing at Casa.
No. Thank you. No, that's another great. We could have a whole another 5-hour discussion on that one because that is That is huge. And I think that's another, somebody asked about Governor Hogan, right? I think that's also something else that we can hold them accountable for, because what we're seeing increasingly is this merging of these corporate partnerships with the creation of additional. We're seeing another way of putting it. We're seeing people detained as an opportunity for these corporations to create, to engage the government in additional contracts and building more detention centers, right? I think one of the things that we have to stand firm on, I think, is, and this is what we're seeing in Virginia, we're seeing intergovernmental service agreements between municipalities and states and ICE. So what that basically means is ICE is reaching out to different states and different counties and creating agreements between them that actually allow them to imprison detained immigrants in the county jails, and the county jails get a stipend, basically, for every night that immigrant is there. We need to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? I think there are certain, again, in the Virginia context, we know this is the situation in Fairfax County. I believe Anne Arundel, I can't remember, might have an agreement. Frederick, of course, has one. We have to, again, work at the state and county level to ensure that those contracts are eliminated. It is they operate under very kind of shady circumstances. It's unclear ultimately who signs them, because in some situations you have the sheriffs that have authority over the jails. In some cases it's the county executive. Regardless, we have to out these contracts and ensure that they don't happen. That's on one level, right? On the macro level, of course, we're seeing this all over the border, right? There are increasing numbers of institutions that we know of, right? That we patronize, that are increasingly getting involved in the jail business, right? The global detention industrial complex, right? And these are banks like Wells Fargo. These are other institutions, other corporations that are creating conglomerates that are basically trying to make money out of detaining immigrants, right? This is another area where we have to do the research. We have to out these corporations when we find out about these, and we have to make our stand, right? And we have to ensure that we don't patronize these businesses and we don't patronize these folks when we find out that they're making money out of exploiting undocumented immigrants that are being separated from their families and deported, right? I think it's a very frustrating, because it is a very kind of nebulous, kind of shady, very corporate world. Or initiatives, and sometimes it's hard to get clear facts on some of these things, but there are leverage points where we can press. Definitely at the county municipal level and at the state level, we have to make sure those IGSAs don't happen, right? That counties and municipalities aren't making money again from ICE, from having a contractual relationship with them. But there's also tons of really bad stuff that happened at the detention, the official detention, the ICE detention centers all over this area, right? There's still a lot of reports out there about the conditions that many people are faced when they're being detained. Sometimes even literally being put in ice boxes because these detention facilities are so ridiculously cold. And that's just the easy one. That's just scratching the surface, right? But there's additional accountability that we can press for when it comes to how these facilities are run. So those are just a couple.
Thank you. And the last question, you've already addressed this, unless you have something else to add about how congregations can be more involved in helping Casa in your work.
Ooh, that's perfect. Jenny Friedman has just made her way to the...
I wanted to just do a couple shameless plugs. That's okay. Hi, everybody. Looking the wrong way. A couple of things. First of all, we have an action coming up on December 6th. Congress needs to pass their budget resolution December 8th. And we're trying to tie in a DACA fix and TPS legislation to that. And on December 6th, we're trying to mobilize 20,000 people downtown. We would love you to come. And so, in fact, if Cedar Lane has enough people for a bus, we'll send a bus for you guys to come down. So that's one concrete thing that you can do. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the K. Fritz Foundation has given us a challenge grant. And for between now and the end of December, for any donors who become monthly sustainers, who decide to give monthly, they'll match that. So if you decide to give $10 a month to Casa, it can turn into $20 a month. And so I wanted to share that because I know a lot of people are thinking about giving during the holidays, and that might be a concrete thing for you to do. And then also outside, on a table outside, we have a sign-up sheet if you would like to volunteer on our C3 side in terms of clinics, or on our C4 side in the upcoming elections, doing phone banking or knocking on doors. That's also appreciated as well.
And they also have this amazing 2018 calendar that I highly recommend because of what's inside.
Yes, and that's outside for you all too. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Jen.
And Betty Hoover is one of our founding board members, by the way, one of the
Right.
people who created Casa.
Well, thank you so much, George, for
Thank you very much.
spending all this
take
time
so.
with us. Grateful for what you brought and shared with us today. And please check out the Casa table. Before we close, I just have a couple of announcements to make. Can't do without announcements, right? So we also wanted to lift up the Immigration Film Festival that's happening in the area. There are flyers available outside on your way out with that bowl of strawberries. And I think you're welcome to have a strawberry and take a flyer. I think so, right? Yes. And there are some amazing films that are happening. And especially I want to highlight a post-Thanksgiving celebration of immigrants who harvest our produce, which is at 7 p.m. Saturday, November 25th, called Strawberry Days. It's a East Coast premiere of this film. So please check out the flyer. And I want to mention the many folk who worked very hard to create a wonderfully welcoming, hospitable evening tonight. These are members of our Immigrant Justice Ministry team and also our Together team, Together Diversity team, who not only helped put together the wonderful exhibit that you saw when you walked in, the Building Bridges exhibit, Immigrant and Refugee Stories, but also the delicious meal that we had. So I just would like to take a moment to thank all of our volunteers who worked tirelessly to make this such a wonderful evening. Thank you. And the last announcement is next month's forum. You may have seen on your table, on your seats, a card which you're welcome to take home with you. Our next month's forum will be led by Haroon Mogul, who is the author of a powerful memoir published by Beacon Press, which is the Unitarian Universalist Association's publishing arm, called How to Be a Muslim. You may have heard him on Terry Gross's Fresh Air a couple of months ago. Anyway, we're really privileged to have him as our evening speaker next month, December 10th at 7:30 p.m. And Haroon will be reflecting on his journey as a Muslim American and what it means to be growing up Muslim here and touching on things. He is a fellow at the Jewish-Muslim Relations at the Shalom Hartman Institute. And he has appeared on all major U.S. media networks, and he is the author of 3 books. And with regard to How to Be a Muslim, the Washington Post called it an extraordinary gift, an authentic portrayal of a vastly misunderstood community. And he's a graduate of Columbia University with an MA in Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies. And he also let me know that he kind of wants to move to Los Angeles. So this is a good transit stop before he heads off there. Anyway, thank you so much again for being here tonight. We're deeply grateful to have you, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a good night.